Hello and welcome to this Monday edition of the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast, a show that is for the fans, by the fans. I am your phenomenal host, Mr. Podcasting, Chris Belcher. You can follow me at Chris Belcher24 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The show is at PBW Podcast on those platforms, so make sure you give us a follow. Interact with us on social media. That is the best way for us to know if what we're talking about is what you want to hear about. So interact with us. We would greatly appreciate that. If you are checking us out for the first time ever, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Hit that subscribe button wherever you have found our show. That way you get a notification every time we drop a new one every Monday and Thursday. Once again, my name is Chris Belcher. And as I told you guys several times, Andy is on vacation this week. And this past episode, I was not able, due to scheduling conflicts, to get a guest, so you got to hear me ramble for 45 minutes. But today, ladies and gentlemen, you do not have to suffer that fate, because I do have a very special guest. He is, I guess one of his new nicknames could be the very special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Old School has returned to the show. He is the whole podcasting show. My brother from another mother, Jared Justice, is in the house. Man, what's the haps?
How's it going, brother? Been too long.
It has been a hot minute. I know we had you on for an episode during WrestleMania week where we talked about our memories of going to WrestleMania. And then I hit you up this week and said, hey, Andy's on vacation. I need you to come do a podcast episode. And you said, okay, what about we do a podcast episode about Backlash? And I said, okay, that's perfect timing. WrestleMania Backlash is coming up next week. A little under a week from when you're listening to this episode. So we're going to talk about the history of Backlash. We're going to talk about some good and some bad and some stuff in between. But Jared, man, Backlash has been a staple of WWE since 1999. It is the traditional pay-per-view after WrestleMania, a perfect name for it. And I don't know about you, but going back and doing research on the actual event, man, a lot of these Backlash pay-per-views are really good, and they stand alone as good pay-per-views, not just as a follow-up to WrestleMania. This is good stuff, man. I really enjoyed going to doing research about this.
Yeah, I think it would be a good show to attend. You know, you talk about what you've talked about shows that we'd like to go to. We've been to SummerSlam, we've been to Mania, we've been to Raw, AEW. But this would be like, I think, one of your prime shows to go to, especially now because they're calling the thing WrestleMania Backlash. And whenever they first started this concept, I remember wondering to myself, Backlash, where'd that come from? But now that they've done it, consecutively after WrestleMania, it makes perfect sense. You get a lot of your matches from WrestleMania. You get rematches, which sometimes have been better than the match you got at Mania.
Right.
So it's a phenomenal show. They usually are.
So I was going to ask you that later on in the show, but since you brought it up, you're okay with the branding, like sticking WrestleMania on there, or would you rather it just be standalone?
Man, with everything going on in the world today, it's just like girls that I talk to and stuff. So much used to matter to me, people's political stance and their beliefs on this or that. And man, it's just like, enjoy life, have fun. Who cares? Who cares what they call it?
Right.
If it's a good show, man, I'm down with it. I don't care if they called every pay-per-view WrestleMania Survivor Series, WrestleMania SummerSlam. If it's a good show, who cares?
Right. No, I'm with you. I know there was a lot of heat on them when they first started doing that, but I'm okay with it. I think it makes sense because, like you said, you're getting a lot of follow-up from WrestleMania on this show, so it makes sense to tie the two together. As I mentioned, the first Backlash, man, was in 1999. It was the first time that WWE dropped the In Your House moniker. Was the first Backlash in, I think, April of 99. And you mentioned WrestleMania rematches. I go all the way back to the 99 one, man. We saw the rematch of The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, a no-holds-barred match at the first Backlash. Shane McMahon being the special referee and trying to screw Austin as the McMahons do. But a lot of great stuff on that very first Backlash. You had Triple H and X-Pac right after Triple H turned on DX. They went one-on-one in a great match. You had, that was the night that The Undertaker captured or kidnapped Stephanie McMahon in the limo. And it's the infamous, the window rolls down and he says, "Where to, Stephanie?" And they drive off. That happened at Backlash. And then as I watched the 99 one, you had this great hardcore match. I miss Attitude Era hardcore matches. But man, that 99 Backlash, man, that's a loaded card. And they really set the table for what was to come for Backlashes in the future, I think.
Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to think, and I was thinking about WrestleMania 20.
Yep.
Whenever that you had, was that not whenever that you had, what was the pay-per-view? Whenever you had Shawn versus Triple H versus Benoit.
That was Backlash. Yeah, that was the rematch from WrestleMania 20. Yep, that was 04.
Yes. And I was sitting here thinking, I was like, man, I'm pretty sure that the match we got at Backlash was almost as good, maybe even better in some ways, than the one that we got at Mania, which is, and I know some people don't want to watch Chris Benoit matches. That's fine, to everybody their own. But man, that's a match that I go back and watch. Is that WrestleMania 20 match, and I forget about the Backlash rematch. And that's just one example of great matches, rematches that you've got from WrestleMania at Backlash.
Well, and in that match too, it made so much sense because they were in Benoit's hometown of Edmonton, Alberta, and he beat Shawn Michaels with a sharpshooter. Shawn tapped out to the sharpshooter in Canada. Very poetic way that they were able to end that match. And I know you mentioned that a lot of people might not be able to watch Benoit matches for one reason or another. I went back and I watched the rematch that you're talking about, a Backlash 04. And it was the first time I had a problem with the Benoit match. And the reason had nothing to do with Benoit. It was because they showed his family at ringside. Then I just went, oh, that hurt. Like, I was totally good with watching Benoit stuff, and then they did that, and I just went, oh.
Well, man. The story I've told on here that we've talked about, and people probably get sick of hearing it, but I'm still going to say it. I met Kevin Sullivan so many times at Daytona. I'm getting ready to go back to Daytona again. So every time I go there, I always think, back to my childhood whenever I met Kevin Sullivan. And I distinctly remember woman, Chris Benoit's, Nancy Benoit, Chris Benoit's wife, being down there by the pool with Kevin Sullivan the first time that I ever saw him. And I was like, hey, Dad, I think that's a wrestler over there. And Dad's like, who? And I said, that's Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster. And then I go over there to talk to him. And then I see woman laying next to him, Nancy Benoit. And every time that I think back on that now, it just, I don't know. It's, after knowing what the entire story was, it just even puts a damper on that. So, I mean, I understand, if people can't watch those matches. I'm glad you told me before that I went back and watched that and saw that, because I would have been like, oh, my God. But
because not only is she there, but the kids are there. And I'm like, oh, man. Oh. That was rough. But then you watch the match, and like you said, the match is just as good as the WrestleMania match, and Shawn taps out to the sharpshooter. So it's pretty poetic. What's a Backlash match really? I know I talked about 99. You mentioned the 04 rematch. I think there's another 04 match that we need to talk about because not only was that triple threat main event fantastic, but there was another match that we need to talk about. And that's Mick Foley and Randy Orton. The match that really put Randy Orton on the map.
I think that's the match that maybe put Backlash on the map.
Yes.
You think of Backlash, you see advertisements for this pay-per-view, and you see the video packages. And almost every time you see, if I'm not mistaken, I think Orton's got Mick Foley for the RKO onto the barbed wire baseball bat.
Right.
And that's just the match that most people think of. I mean, I know that's the one I think of whenever I think of Backlash.
And it was so bloody, and it was so brutal. And it was just Lewis thumbtacks and barbed wire and all this, like you said. And Randy Orton even mentioned this match last week on Monday Night Raw when they were doing the 20th anniversary celebration. He went into depth. The only person he went into depth about thanking for his career was Mick Foley. And he referenced this match. Like, this was the match. Because right after this, Randy's Intercontinental Champion. Right after this, he drops the Intercontinental title only to beat Benoit at SummerSlam to become the youngest World Heavyweight Champion ever. So this is the match. Like you said, it put Backlash on the map, put Randy Orton on the map at the same time. And, man, he was off to the races after that.
And is it not so funny? I mean, I know we're talking about Backlash, but of course I'm going to throw some current product in here a little bit.
Of course we are.
But you got Randy Orton with this molester's mustache, and he comes out, and he is just having so much fun. It's just like Brock Lesnar with his Viking mohawk. I mean, he's out there, he's bouncing around, and that thing's flopping every which way. And Randy
We're having some technical.
You have Brock that's bouncing around and his little ponytail thing's flopping, and you got Randy Orton out there with this huge stoner that they tried to not acknowledge that this man clearly loves pot. Okay, I mean, based on his entrance, based on everything that he does, on 420 they came out with the shirt Team Radio or whatever Team RK Bro, and so it has the 420 and clearly is alluding to marijuana. And here's Randy Orton out here just having a big time with him. And you think of all the dastardly stuff that Orton did. The match with Foley included the barbed wire, the thumbtacks, getting thrown off that stage. Then here comes Foley with the elbow drop onto, just planks of wood that have been broke. And God knows what else. And all the stuff he's done. And now there he is out there just like a big kid, smiling and having a good time.
You went to current product, but I'm going to deviate for just a second. We're talking about Randy Orton and his career and the match that put him on the map. I think back to everybody was really celebrating Randy Orton's career this week or last week, at time of recording. We're really celebrating Randy Orton's career and all that he's done in the wrestling business. And it made me think back to the promo that Triple H cut the night that he introduced Randy Orton as a member of Evolution. And he called him the diamond in the rough. He called him the next great star in the wrestling business. Man, I'm not saying Triple H is a philosopher. And I said this on the Monday show or Thursday show, rather. I'm not saying he's a philosopher, but could you imagine how true those words were that Triple H said? Like the weight of him saying that Randy Orton was the next great star in the business. And, he was a diamond in the business. Man, he blew those expectations out of the water. What a 20-year career that Randy Orton has had, man. He's not really considered one of the greatest of all time by a lot of people, but you look at his body of work and it's hard to argue, man.
The one thing that they could have done to really put him on the map and made him be one of those people that you think of as one of the best ever is if he had been the person to end the legend of the Undertaker streak at WrestleMania.
Yep.
I think that if they were going to break the Undertaker's streak, it should have been Orton, not Brock.
I agree. Yep. I completely agree. I really do.
I mean, I think that would have solidified him
as one of the top 10, 5, whatever of all time, for sure. Yep, I totally agree.
Right.
All right. Speaking of Triple H, I want to ask you about something that in the 3 years of us doing this podcast, because it's been a minute, man, 4 years really, of us doing this podcast, something we haven't really talked about, I want to get your thoughts on, is the two-man power trip of Stone Cold Steve Austin and Triple H. Because at Backlash 01, the main event was a winner-take-all titles on the line. And the World Heavyweight Champion, Stone Cold Steve Austin, teaming up with the Intercontinental Champion, Triple H, taking on Kane and The Undertaker, the WWE Tag Team Champions. Stone Cold and Triple H win this match, and they hold all the gold in the WWE. And I feel you listen to Bruce Pritchard, and a lot of our listeners might listen to Bruce, and he has said that Triple H and Austin were just so gung ho about doing this 2-man power trip thing. Like they wouldn't hear anything else. It was their way or the highway as far as that goes. What were your thoughts on the 2-man power trip? Because Rock is gone at this time. He's taking a break. He's filming a movie or something. And then you got Stone Cold and Triple H running the show only for about a month. And then Triple H, of course, gets hurt and he's out for 9 months. But what do you think about the 2-man power trip? Was it too much? Was it not enough? Like, what are your thoughts on them?
Oh, man. I mean, I thought that they had some great matches against each other. I think if you go back, I think it was still on VHS. One of the first times, and I'm not promoting this, this is just a historical fact. One of the first times I ever remember hearing the GD word on WWF programming was on one of those old VHS tapes, and it was Stone Cold versus Triple H. And after the match was over, it goes backstage, and Stone Cold uses that word. And I still remember it to this day. Like I said, I'm not promoting using God's name in vain or anything like that. But now with everything that you see, I mean, they're saying the SH word and using all this other stuff. And I feel like that the one thing that I remember about the 2-man power trip was that they kind of introduced a little more risque language, particularly after that match. I thought their matches against each other were phenomenal. I think that they would have had a really good run as the 2-man power trip being together if Triple H hadn't got injured. I mean, looking back, it just sucks because it's like, what could they have done?
Right.
How good could that have been? And we never got to see it.
And rumor being that they were on a collision course to face each other at WrestleMania 18, which was, the pay-per-view, the WrestleMania following this. So it would have been the heels power trip, Triple H turning babyface, and then a heel Austin versus a babyface Triple H the following year at WrestleMania. So they definitely could have, definitely would have been interesting, but like you said, sometimes injuries happen. Speaking of that 02 WrestleMania, we followed that up with Backlash in 02, and that's the night that we see Scott Hall's final WWE match. He goes a real short match against Bradshaw right after the APA split up. That's Scott Hall's last match in the WWE, and I want to acknowledge that pay-per-view as well because Triple H goes into it as the undisputed champion, only for him to drop it to Hollywood Hulk Hogan back in the red and yellow after only a month reign. He goes off from his injury. He comes back and he finally wins the gold at WrestleMania, and he gets ripped out from under him by Hogan. And then Hogan drops it to The Undertaker a month later. Like, they hot shot of the world title. I remember, like, to this day, I'm like you, I'm shaking my head. I still get aggravated that Hogan won the title. I know why they did it, man, but it still annoys me that Hogan won the title that night from Triple H.
Well, I mean, quite possibly the only other man in this world that has a bigger ego than Triple H, if you disqualify Vince McMahon, is Hulk Hogan.
Right.
So that doesn't work for me, brother. I'm going to go out there and drop the big leg, and they talk about all the people that Triple H buried, but look at how many people he made, just like we were talking about with Randy Orton.
Yes.
And he didn't make Shawn Michaels, but boy, he sure helped whenever Shawn Michaels made his return.
That's
that
right.
Second run that Shawn had. But you look back and Hulk Hogan beat Triple H. Is that not ridiculous?
It is. It's so ridiculous. It's one of the most ridiculous things that I've ever seen. It's still like I went back and I watched that match in preparing for the show, and it made me mad all over again. I don't know why I did it. I knew I was going to get mad. I don't know why I did it, but I did anyway. It's ridiculous.
Now, do you remember Starrcade 97?
Shut up. We are not getting into that today. No, sir.
There was a match that included Hulk Hogan.
We're not getting into that today.
Somebody else who was not tanned. He was not tanned for that match.
He shouldn't have been tanned. There was no need for him to be tanned. He was wearing a trench coat for 16 months. Oh, gee. Okay, moving along. we talk about good things that happen at Backlash. Now let's transition to one of the more questionable things that happened at Backlash. Happened in 2006, and Vince and Shane McMahon had a tag team match against Shawn Michaels and God.
And God. And God even had a ring introduction.
God had more than a ring introduction. Vince McMahon tried to get the referee to pat God down to make sure he wasn't carrying any foreign objects. Like, come on.
And again, like I said, if you disqualify Vince McMahon, Hulk Hogan and Triple H have two of the biggest things. If you include Vince McMahon, he's the clear winner.
I mean, my goodness, man. Like, I watched that earlier today, actually, because I was like, okay. I was actually supposed to be at this event. It was Backlash 06. It was in Lexington, Kentucky. I'll tell you that story off air as to why I didn't go to that show. I'm not going to tell it on air because I don't want to bury the responsible party. But anyway, so I went back and I watched this, and I was like, is it really that uncomfortable? Like, I don't know. Everybody talks about how that they used like God as in the entertainment perspective, knowing that like it's so ridiculous and so far-fetched that it's storytelling. It's no different than somebody using it in a movie or whatever. And we're not getting all religious on this podcast or whatever, but man, like I went back and watched it today. Some of that was kind of uncomfortable. I'm just going to say, like, to me, it was a little bit, I don't know. It's a little uncomfortable.
One way that you can look, if you are the type of person that believes in religion or reads it just because that you want to learn more about it.
Right.
One way that if you look back in the Bible at the unforgivable sin, it's called blasphemy. Yep. Now, according to a lot of people's interpretation, blasphemy can no longer be done after Jesus was dead. If that's how you look at it, saying that something that the devil did, or like something that Jesus did was actually of the devil's doing, something right. Good. But a lot of people's interpretation of blasphemy is exactly what you saw on WWF programming here.
Yep.
I mean, they shone a light, and supposedly God is coming down the ring in this light. There's nothing there, of course. And there he comes into the ring, and Vince wants God patted down. Well, clearly God is not there in a physical form, right. But they're kind of making fun of him. So I mean, I can see how people would be uncomfortable with that.
Especially the fact that in his entrance, and I wouldn't remember this had I not gone back and watched it today. In his entrance, Vince stops God and stops the music, and he says, "Wait a minute." He says, "What is this entrance that you're doing?" He said, "This is boring." He said, "We need to WWE this entrance." And they start playing this hip hop choir type music. And he says, "Come on, God, bust the move. Dance, God, come on." Yeah. And Vince is dancing in the ring. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, that's a little much.
Yeah.
It's a little much.
It is a little much. It's a little much for me. I don't know that I've watched that more than the initial time I saw it ever.
I think today was the first time that
I don't know that I will.
Right. I think today was the first time that I ever went back and actually watched it after it actually happened. I'm like, I could stand to not ever watch that again. Anyway, let's move on to something a lot more exciting and a lot more politically correct. And that's another match with Shawn Michaels. It was the following year at Backlash. And man, I'm going to go on record right now. And I'm going to say this is the best Backlash match of all time. And I'll put the 04 main event up against it, and I'll put up Randy Orton and Mick Foley against it. It's the Fatal 4-Way main event from 2007. It is Shawn Michaels, it is Edge, it is Randy Orton, and the champion John Cena. Oh my goodness. And especially like the finishing sequence of the match where the spear is hit and the AA is hit, and Shawn hits a super kick and Cena falls on Orton and he pins him. Like, It is the best Backlash match of all time. If y'all haven't gone back and watched that recently, you need to. It's phenomenal. Have you watched that recently?
I haven't. I had kind of forgot about it until you just mentioned it, and now that I'm thinking back, I remember it. But I need to go back and watch that one. That sounds like an incredible match. Normally, 4-ways are one person too many for me.
Right. Yep.
I
I
like
agree.
one-on-one best, and triple threats are also pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of your fatal 4-ways are just not good. But if you think back to the fatal 4-way pay-per-view and that match that we got, and then apparently this match that you're talking about that I completely forgot about, I mean, both of those are phenomenal, whereas a lot of those don't really seem to connect as much with me.
Right. And then the next year in 2008, we get another, I feel like I'm putting Shawn Michaels over, but it's what I do. We get another legend. We get another legendary Shawn Michaels moment. And that is the beginning of the Chris Jericho Shawn Michaels feud in 2008. And it starts at Backlash because Shawn wrestles Batista, and that's the night that he faints the knee injury. And Jericho calls him out on it. And that's how Shawn wins the match. That also happened at Backlash 2008. So a lot of good stuff happened at Backlash. It ran all the way from 99 to 2009. And then we took a 6-7 year hiatus. And then when the brand split happened in 2016, SmackDown brought Backlash back as its first pay-per-view. And Jared, that night was the night that AJ Styles won his first WWE Championship at that Backlash from Dean Ambrose. Man, I know that everybody's probably thinking, well, Chris is just an AJ Styles mark. Jared's probably thinking, well, he's just an AJ Styles mark. That's the only reason he brought it up. No, Jared, the reason that I bring it up is that pay-per-view happened in September of 2016. AJ Styles debuted in January of 2016. We talk about the rookie year of anybody in WWE. Man, it doesn't get much better than what AJ Styles did between January and then winning the title in September of 2016. What a run that he had, and then to cap it off at Backlash.
I mean, if we could have just somehow shoehorned Sting into a Backlash main event that you could next prop up on the pedestal, I mean, this would really just be like the Chris Belcher triple threat 3-way, the best wrestlers ever.
It would be. You are absolutely correct. You're correct. It would.
But it is funny looking back at AJ's story that Vince doesn't like people who sound too Southern or sound too hick or whatever. And you listen to AJ's theme song and you can't break this redneck. And there he is coming in there with his accent and all. And within the first year, wins the title.
Yep. And has an incredibly long reign. Yeah, absolutely it is. It has an incredibly long reign for that year. And for a guy that everybody said he would never make it in WWE, or if he got there, he would just get jobbed out or whatever, he's winning the title within a year and holding it from September until January. And then he's main eventing all through 2017. And then guess what? 2017, he wins it again and he holds it for a year until he drops it to Daniel Bryan. Like, I'm just saying, like, I'm putting over AJ Styles here. That pay-per-view also was the first SmackDown pay-per-view after the, was the first SmackDown pay-per-view of the brand split. We saw Becky Lynch that night being crowned the SmackDown Women's Champion and really made the face of that brand. And now that was when SmackDown was running extremely hot. They were well outperforming Raw during that era. But this is coming off of WrestleMania 32 back in April, so a couple months removed, where Becky Lynch was in a triple threat match with Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair. And there's a lot of people out there, wrestling journalists, fans, or whatever, that just discount Becky Lynch being in that match for whatever reason. And then, man, we get to Backlash, and Becky Lynch becomes the face of SmackDown and then transitions a few years down the road into what we know her as today. So not only was AJ Styles set up to make his big run at that Backlash pay-per-view, but Becky Lynch was as well, man.
Yeah. So you got Orton, Becky, and AJ. That you could make the argument were all somewhat made at Backlash.
You're exactly right.
I mean, that makes it a heck of a pay-per-view to me.
Yeah, I mean, it shows you the importance. I mean, when I started this off and I was saying that these could be standalone shows or just great follow-ups to WrestleMania or whatever, I mean, I wasn't BSing when I said that this is a make or break pay-per-view for the WWE. Like, when you go back and you look at the context of everything that has happened, not just the three people that we just mentioned, everything that's happened at Backlash, man, incredible stuff. Now, one that a lot of people don't either put a lot of stock into or just don't remember because they choose to block out wrestling in 2020 is another Randy Orton match. And it came at the 2020 Backlash. And it was against Edge. And it was deemed as the greatest wrestling match ever. Now, we all know that when you deem that the greatest wrestling match ever before the match even happens, there's no way it's going to happen. Or no way it's going to live up to it, rather. But
right.
I went back and I rewatched that match, man. And if you're a fan of the Randy Orton style of match and the storytelling by Edge, and you understand that WWE is trying to help enhance the viewer presentation because there's no fans there, and you get that concept in your head when you watch that match, man, that match really does hold up. It's so good. I hate the Edge tore his triceps in that match, but man, that match is so good. And again, we're talking about Randy Orton.
Well, you look back at it, and this is one of the few times in wrestling history that they were able to take this ahead of time, and they could take out any mistakes that were made.
Yep.
So there's no reason why this should not have been the greatest wrestling match of all time. And I dare say that if you look at all of it, the entertainment aspect, what they had to work with, no mistakes, basically flawless as far as the presentation. I think it was one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time.
I mean, and you're putting two of the greatest of all time in the ring. So the mistakes are going to be limited as it is. And unfortunately, when they reshot something, that's when Edge tore his triceps, but it is what it is. All I'm saying is you and I have been guilty of it. And a lot of people are guilty of just kind of dismissing 2020 wrestling and the Thunderdome stuff and the Performance Center stuff or whatever. But if you go back and you just rewatch it, like not as in watching it for the very first time and then leaving it, you go back and rewatch it. This match for sure holds up. Like, it is really, really good. So I highly recommend it if you haven't in a long time.
Well, as long of a match as it was like in the first couple of days after I watched it the first time that I went back and rewatched it again.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's that good, people. So
yeah,
I highly recommend it too.
It's like and applaud WWE's effort for trying to make it what it needed to be and trying to enhance the viewership. And, you know, they told you ahead of time they were going to spice up the crowd and they were going to do some different camera angles or whatever. So you got to applaud WWE's creativity in that sense. But one of the things that I can't applaud WWE for is something else they tried in the Thunderdome era at the first WrestleMania.
There's something you don't applaud them for? Oh my god.
At the first WrestleMania Backlash, we had Damian Priest versus The Miz in a zombie lumberjack match.
I'm glad I did not watch that.
Oh, you've never seen this?
No. Don't go back.
Don't go back and watch it. It is one of the most atrocious things you will ever watch in wrestling history. Could be the worst thing in wrestling history of all time. It is the ultimate turd sandwich. Ultimate.
Of all time.
Of all time. Way worse than AJ
It's
Nakamura.
WWE. It's WWE. And you're saying it's the worst of all time. I mean, it's bad.
It's terrible. It's awful. So bad. So all I'm saying is that with every good comes a bad, even at a pay-per-view like Backlash, and they served up the turd sandwich that was The Miz versus Damian Priest in a zombie lumberjack match. Of course, you would think, though, that anything that The Miz is in would be a turd sandwich, right?
I mean, he serves his role, man. He's not the best ever. Maybe he's like the best enhancement wrestler ever, best jobber ever, but he's not the best ever.
He's not the best ever. You're right, but he's pretty dang good at what he does. All right, we've kind of really like gone through some of the history of Backlash, and there's so much stuff that we skipped. A lot of good stuff. I mean, we saw Hulk Hogan and Shawn Michaels tagging up in 05. I didn't even mention all the last man standing matches that we saw, like between Edge and Benoit, Edge and Cena, Taker and Batista. So in this week leading up to WrestleMania Backlash, I highly encourage people, go back and dive into some of these backlashes. Go dive into some of these really good matches and take these pay-per-views for what they are and just enjoy watching wrestling. But if you had to go back, I've already said that my favorite Backlash match is probably the Fatal 4-Way, the Edge, Cena, Orton, and HBK. If you had to pick one, a favorite Backlash match, you think it would probably be Foley and Orton, or do you think you'd go somewhere else?
As far as just the match, either Foley and Orton or the Triple Threat WrestleMania 20 rematch.
Yeah,
one of those two.
I it's hard to go wrong with any of them, really. But yeah, it just, man, I really like when you serve this topic up to me. That's one of the good things about Jared, by the way, if you people don't realize, is his ability to serve up great topics. And then he depends on me to see if I can hit it out of the park with a good show or not. So anyway, when he served this topic up to me, I was like, okay, well, that could be cool. What are we really going to talk about? And then I started diving into some of this. And again, I hate to continue to harp on this, Jared, but how good of a pay-per-view that Backlash is, and what a rich history of great matches and great storylines that are wrapped up into Backlash. And I think, man, as you look, and this could be a loaded statement or a loaded question or whatever, but as you look back through the history of WWE, I think you could say that about a lot of things when you look at it from that context. You know what I mean? Like if you went back and you looked at all of the In Your House pay-per-views, or you went back and you looked at all of the Judgment Day pay-per-views, or fill in the blank, as standalone, if you looked at these cards, man, there's some really standout matches. And that just goes to show you, man, that WWE, as much as people gripe and complain, and I know you're guilty of it, and I am too, as much as we complain about what they do, there's a reason they've stood the test of time, and there's a reason they're still around doing what they do, because when you go back and look at it, they're doing it well. They're producing a good product.
Yeah, and it's just like we're seeing right now, I think with Austin Theory. They are constantly looking for that next big superstar that they can push. Sometimes they get it right. Sometimes they have to kind of course correct. But, I mean, if they can kind of get a hold of a superstar and then kind of build everything else around them, that's what they've done historically, and it's worked for them.
Yep.
So I think it will continue to work for them. Do I think right now that they have many stars? No, I don't. It just seems like they've let their stars become older and they have not created enough new stars. And that's what irritates me so much about the WWE current product is like, who am I watching the show to see? It's not John Cena. It's not Triple H. It's not Stone Cold. It's not Shawn. It's not Taker. It's not Edge, really. I mean, he's here and there. But who is that one person I'm watching the rest of everything else they pile in there to see? And a lot of times I think that's what we all fall into is we watch these pay-per-views and we watch it for these one or two people and we kind of sleep on so much of everything else until years later and we're like, man, that was really good. Look at who we had back then and look at the matches that they ran and you don't realize what you have till it's gone.
That's
and
right.
Wrestling fans, man, they're guilty of that so bad.
Yep. They absolutely are. For sure they are. And it drives me nuts. I'm not going to get on a rant about wrestling fans. But as we wrap up here, man, as you're talking current product, WrestleMania Backlash is this coming Sunday. Tune in this Thursday. Andy and I are going to break all the matches down for you and give you our thoughts and predictions. But Jared, as you look at the card right now for WrestleMania Backlash, you've got Bobby Lashley versus Omos, AJ Styles versus Edge, Seth Rollins versus Cody Rhodes, Madcap Moss versus Happy Corbin, and then a winner-take-all unification tag team title match, RK Bro versus the Usos. Of those matches that I just laid out to you, what really stands out to you is something that's going to steal the show that you've got your eye on?
Man, Seth versus Cody is probably the one that I would think could possibly steal the show.
Yep.
But I don't think we've seen RK Bro against the Usos ever. So, man, that sounds like a killer match. I mean, the first time seeing it, I want to watch that.
Yeah, I'm looking, man, I really am. Aside from Bobby Lashley and Omos, like I'm looking forward to the rest of the card. I think it's going to be really, really good. But again, I will formulate my thoughts and we'll give you something more concrete this coming Thursday on the show. So make sure you tune in wherever you find your podcast, on SportsWire Radio and on the BodySlam.net YouTube channel. Make sure you're following, subscribe, download, all of those things. Well, man, let's put a bow on this episode. Is there anything else about WrestleMania, Backlash, anything like that you want to add before we give the old Larry Sabisco wave and sign off?
Man, I'm just, I look at where me and you started this whole show. We had Jason with us, Jason Backowitz, and I look at where we started. And now to be associated with BodySlam.net, a site that I've always known that I go to and trust, I'm impressed, man. I mean, I know that with scheduling being the way it is and work situations in life, I don't get to be on here a lot. But, man, I'm proud of you boys. You all were carrying that torch that me and you and Jason started, and it's killer, man. So I'm proud of you.
Well, we're going to get you on here. We're going to make something happen. I can promise you that. Scheduling, as I said on the Thursday episode, scheduling has been my fault recently. We're working on that. And I know that all of our listeners like to hear from Jared a lot. I like to hear from Jared a lot. So Jared's going to make regular appearances on this show again. We're going to get that figured out. But until the next time that he joins us, thank you for hopping on. You know that I always love and appreciate when you are here. As we give the old Larry Sabisco wave and we sign off, again, make sure you're checking out our archives for all of our past episodes. Jared's on a bunch of them. We talk old school. We talk new school. There's something for every wrestling fan here on the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast. For Mr. Jared Justice, my name is Chris Belcher. Thank you for hanging out with us today on this edition of the PipeBomb Wrestling Podcast. We will catch you guys down the road.